Instead, we have the opportunity to make a habit of empathy, to recognize ourselves in each other.
This is a clip from a speech Barack gave at Campus Progress, which is a progressive organization that promotes young progressive leaders. And you'll see that some of his speeches start getting a little bit repetitive. He retells some of the stories and ideas that he's mentioned previously.
Which brings me, I guess, to just a last guidepost as you think about how you're going to carry the work that you're doing now into the future, and that is cultivate a sense of empathy. You know, there's a lot of talk in this country right now about the federal deficit, the trade deficit. One of the things I'd like us to see talk more about is the empathy deficit. The capacity that sometimes seems absent in our culture to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes, to see through their eyes, to understand the world from the perspective of people who are different from us. The child who's hungry, the laid-off steel worker, the immigrant woman who cleans your dorm room, the conservative who is standing outside an abortion clinic protesting. I don't care who it is. Thinking about what is it that they see? What is it that they feel? What motivates them? Is there some capacity for us to find some common ground? Now, the fact that you're here and participating in Campus Progress means that most of you have already done this better than most. But as you go on in life, cultivating that quality of empathy becomes harder, not easier. There's no community service requirement outside of college. No one is going to force you to care. You will be free to live in neighborhoods with people who are exactly like yourself and send your kids to the same schools and narrow your concerns to what's going on in your own little circle. That is how our society is structured. That is the path that has been worn for you. And we also live in a culture that increasingly discourages empathy, a culture that all too often tells us our principal goal in life is to be rich, thin, young, famous, safe, and entertained. A culture where those in power too often encourage the impulse of selfishness and not selflessness. People will tell you that Americans who sleep in the streets and beg for food got there because they're lazy or weak in spirit. That the inner city child who's trapped in a dilapidated school can't learn and won't learn, and so we should just give up on them entirely. That innocent people being slaughtered and expelled from their homes halfway around the world are somebody else's problem to take care of. I hope you don't listen to this. I hope you choose to broaden and not contract your ambit of concern. Not because you have an obligation to those who are less fortunate than you, although I think you do have that obligation, not just because you've got a debt to those who helped you get to where you are today, although I think you do have that debt, but primarily because you have that obligation to yourself. Because at some level, your individual salvation depends on our collective salvation. It's only when you hitch yourself up to something bigger than yourself that you're going to realize your true potential, and the world will benefit from that potential. So as I think about all the good each of you has potentially the potential to do in this world, I'm reminded of this image. It's the image of young Americans, teenage kids and college kids, not much older than you, some of them younger than you, from all around the country, who were watching the civil rights movement back in the early 60s, watching it unfold before their television screens. I imagine that they would have seen the marchers and they would have heard the speeches, but they also probably saw the dogs and the fire hoses, or the footage of innocent people being beaten within an inch of their life. And maybe they would have heard the news of that day where 4 little girls were killed while they were in Sunday school in Birmingham. And instinctively, they would have known that it was safer and smarter to stay at home, to watch that movement from afar. But somewhere in their hearts, they also understood that these people in Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi were their brothers and their sisters, and that what was happening was wrong, and they had an obligation to make it right. And so when the buses pulled up for a freedom ride down south, they got on, and they rode, thousands of them, and they changed this country, and they transformed the world.
See the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.